Is it being recorded? Oh, good.
Yep, that's the answer to your question. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us and welcome to another in our series of webinars for teachers, mainly aimed at teachers in Spain, but we have a couple of people at least who are from outside Spain, so very, very welcome. And I hope you're all safe and well. My name is Mark Levy and I'm the head of our English programs team in Spain. And our webinar today is going to be delivered by Tracey Chapelton, and I'll mention her in a moment, but also just to point out the other members of the team who are on the webinar with us. So that's Anne, who's in Bilbao. Hi, Anne. Maureen, who's in Madrid. And Natalia, under the pseudonym of Claire, who's in London. So very welcome. This is the webinar for some of you, I think, have come back. This is a webinar that we attempted to deliver as part of a series of early years, primary and secondary, back at the beginning of April, but we had some unwelcome guests who had nothing better to do than spoil our session. So we're very grateful to Tracey. We've managed to find a safer platform and we've managed to get Tracey to find some time to deliver again. So this is the webinar that some of you may have started last time and others will be seeing for the first time. Tracey is a very experienced teacher and teacher trainer, has worked for the British Council for a long time and is involved in a lot of our online delivery, our MOOCs, but she's also trained as a secondary school teacher and worked as a secondary school teacher for teaching English for many years. So she has a lot of experience in all of the aspects of what we're doing today. I'm going to leave with Tracey. The question and answer box is open, both for you to mention who you are, where you're from if you want to, but also for you to write down at any point that you want, any questions or comments or ideas you want to share as a result of something that Tracey is talking about. And we'll either summarize those if they're questions to Tracey later on or at the appropriate moment, or we may at some point share them with you if they're things that you need to share with each other. So there is a raised hand option. I just noticed because somebody did it. But we're not going to open any mics at the beginning. So if you have something to say, can you put it in the question and answer box? Because after what happened to us last time, we're not planning to open up the mics, at least at the beginning. So if you do have a question, then please there. If you have a technical question because you can't hear or can't see, then it's probably something to do with the configuration of your settings. So look at the little image of a microphone or the image of the video that you have on your own setting, and you'll probably find it's a configuration there. Okay? Luis is saying that he can't open the chat. No, you can't. I'm afraid the chat's disabled this time because, again, of what happened last time. So there are, we may open it later on, but for the moment the chat's disabled, and any comments, please put in the question and answer box. Sorry about that, but it's, we've had our fingers burnt once, so we're not taking any risks at the moment. Thanks very much, and I'll leave you with, I hope you enjoy the session, and I'll leave you with Tracey. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone else, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Well, I'll just talk to you about what we're going to try and do in today's webinar, which is looking at wellbeing and relationships, setting realistic learning objectives for your students, for your learners, some practical suggestions for meeting those objectives, and sharing ideas as well through the question and answer tool. So, you know, when I first was going to give this webinar, that feels like a very long time ago now. And we've all probably moved on a bit, and people are becoming more and more tech savvy, and got lots of ideas. So hopefully today's session will still be useful in the sense of giving you confidence that you're doing the right thing, and maybe perhaps ideas for how to, you know, enhance or add to what you're already doing, or to answer some burning questions as well. So first of all, I'd like to start with looking at wellbeing and relationships. And I think one thing that's really important to mention is that anxious students don't learn. And obviously because of the situation with the COVID-19 situation, that is going to be generating anxiety of itself, okay? There could be lots of reasons why our students are anxious. It could be because they're in lockdown, because they miss their friends, their family, their friends, their teacher or their grandparents or family members. It could be because they're used to a routine at school and then suddenly there are no boundaries, which is particularly pertinent to students in secondary, where all of a sudden they don't have any boundaries that they've been used to. Or it could be that a family member is ill. So there's lots of reasons why students might be anxious. And although we've all become used to the new normal, I think we shouldn't underestimate the toll that that could be taking on our students. And I think everything that we, any task that we set them, anything that we expect them to learn, we have to remember that anxiety prepares the body for a fight or flight response. And when the body is on high alert, cortisol can alter or shut down functions that get in the way. So when the body's on high alert, and this has happened to me, and I'm sure lots of you, given this particular situation, I've been having difficulty remembering things. I've been having difficulty remembering passwords and simple things that in the past have probably not been a problem. You know, we might find ourselves not being able to remember. That is actually a function that is happening. Our body's trying to help us survive. So that fight or flight response could be kicking in with your students, and they may not have the resilience to be just continuing on as normal and perhaps remembering facts or things that they have to do, that they're being asked to do for school. So it's really important to remember that and take that into consideration. And we'll be looking later at some tips to make the learning relevant during this time and see how we can sort of get the most out of our students without adding stress to their situations. So just to bear in mind as well that not everything that students learn at school can be replicated online. So much of what students learn at school is the relationships that they have with other students and with their teacher. And of course, language and communication is learnt through relationships. So when we're talking about learning a language, that also need to activate that learning, to activate what we're trying to teach our students. All of those sort of tasks that you might do in the classroom with them there in person, like talk to your partner or work in groups, that's not just to pass the time, that's actually there to help the students activate their learning. So we can't replicate that online in the same way as we can at school, but it's worth bearing in mind, maybe perhaps looking at ways that you can do that virtually to help them activate their learning and collaborate and continue to do that. You can still do that using technology, even if it's very basic technology. But it is important to remember that we won't be able to replicate what they're learning at school. All the things like conflict resolution and you know, getting along with each other, all of those things, it's completely different in a virtual setting and requires different approaches. So just on that note, digital technologies can enrich learning just like other educational tools. So we're not proposing that the digital world is going to replace us as teachers, but the technology can be used as a tool. Okay, so just moving on to looking at the difference between school and home. Oh, actually, I was going to talk about going back to my previous slide. I'm a bit tongue-tied. We do need to bear in mind as well, just in terms of the amount of screen time that our teenagers are having is important to bear in mind in the types of activities that you set them, and perhaps look at ways that you can either set projects that involve a bit of technology and then they go off and do something else and then come back to the technology, sort of breaking it into different steps, and that it's not all about being on the screen And it is about perhaps, you know, having different approaches within that, so that the digital technology is just a tool, or perhaps advice for parents even on what they can do. You know, perhaps they could say, well, after dinner time, we're not going to have any more screens or something like that. So just sort of thinking of ways that you could limit that screen time for them and not make the learning all about being on screen. But so that actually does link into my next slide, is the difference between school and home. And what we should be doing is encouraging student autonomy and helping parents support this. So rather, I think something that's really important with teenagers is time management, and it's something that they're learning at the moment, that they were learning in their face-to-face classes. And like I said before, you know, they had boundaries of a timetable and they had to be at a certain place at a certain time. So during the lockdown situation, it's important that we encourage student autonomy and that we help parents in supporting this. So it could be finding solutions to problems independently and using parents as a resource rather than getting them to do the work for them, which is sometimes tempting, especially if the work that they've been set is too difficult. I think some parents might be tempted to think, oh, it's just easier if I do it for them. But actually, if the students have a go at it, and it might not be perfect, but at least it's their work, I think as teachers we should encourage this and not be expecting perfection, and understand that students do learn by making mistakes, and that's evidence of their learning as well, and it's important to value that. Something else to consider between the difference between home and school is that not all students have equal access to quality education at home. Not every, which I think we'd be all familiar with by now, since we've been in lockdown for a while now, that we know that not every family has access to technology. There's also differing levels of education at home. In each home, parents have different work commitments. So some parents could be working in essential frontline services and not have the same amount of time or energy to dedicate to the homeschooling of their children, which is perfectly understandable. And I think it's important to let parents, so home and school routines will be different. And I think it's important for students and parents to be able to organise themselves in the way that works best for their family. And so that means having maybe different, you know, we'll talk about that later in terms of choice, giving students some choice in what they're doing and when they're going to do it. Also, expecting perfection, what I was talking about before, it actually doesn't create good learners. Effort and pride are important. And so allowing students to make mistakes but becoming more autonomous in the process is far more useful long term than getting the answer right. So I'd like to encourage that and encourage you to do things and experiment with things that let children or let the students stumble a bit and feel that struggle, and it's in that struggle that they actually learn something. So I think, if you know, that's one of the important messages for you to take home after watching the webinar. I definitely aim for that to be something that you remember. So as educators, what should our objectives be? So I think this is really important, and this is to really think about what are we doing with our students. And I think for me, it's to provide some sort of continuity. It's to encourage students to keep learning and to avoid student disengagement. And I myself, I'm finding this aspect a challenge because I'm not there with the students, and we don't see each other very often. And so I'm finding that sort of lack of contact really difficult. And so I've always got in the back of my mind, how can I keep these students engaged? How can I keep these students interested in what they're doing so that they're going to want to come back to our 45-minute session when we see each other, or or to ensure that they want to engage with the materials. And I think engagement is already a problem in face-to-face classes. There is a global concern that some students might not come back, and there's a worry about how this experience of COVID-19 could actually affect student dropout rates. I think I was reading an article the other day that 1 in 4 students don't finish 4th year of secondary, so cuarto de la ESO, they don't finish, for those of you who are in Spain. And I think that's a high number, and that's before the COVID-19 situation. And I think, so for me, keeping students in the classroom would be my objective. How can we keep those students engaged? And we're going to have a look at how to do that later in the session. But, I think when we talk about objectives, we're talking about the broadest possible objectives on how to keep them actually engaged. So how can we do that? How can we provide continuity? How can we encourage our students to keep learning, and how can we avoid student disengagement? So again, keep it realistic and achievable for you and the students. Use technology as a tool to help you achieve your objectives, if possible, and it can be sort of low tech, doesn't have to be extravagant. I'm finding myself at the moment that it's the very simple things using technology that are working. Sometimes when I become a bit too ambitious and try things out, that's great too, but they're not always the most successful ways of doing the activity. And I end up going back to the much simpler version of what I was trying to do, always thinking with my objectives, how do I not lose my students' interest? Avoid too much screen time, which is what I spoke about before. Try to use technologies as a tool, not just as something to plonk the students in front of all day, and have them interact with the materials, I think, by using the technology, using the videos they're watching or the articles that they're reading as a stimulus for their own creativity and ideas and answers and investigations. So suggest activity ideas that are meaningful, adaptable, and that encourage curiosity. Okay. I would say that something that's coming up in online courses as well, and certainly in my own case, is that students do lack basic computer skills for turning in work. So it will be important to go back to basics in some cases, and simple things like digital literacy are really important. I found myself this week taking a screenshot of a keyboard and circling all the different keys on the keyboard, like the enter key and the arrow keys, up, down, left and right, and the delete key, the shift key, the space bar. So all of those words that we perhaps didn't give much importance to in the face-to-face, this is a perfect opportunity to teach that digital literacy, which will be so important for them in their future as well. If they become computer programmers or working in an office where they have to speak with people from around the world and know how to use sort of basic terminology that they have in common. So this is an opportunity to do all of that. And so that's an example of how you can make the work meaningful for them, because what they do need, a meaningful task, is to look at something like digital literacy and give them the words for that. And again, as teachers, as I mentioned before, sometimes simpler is better, but don't let that put you off trying something new and having a play around. So I think we're all in a really steep learning curve. I've learned so much, even though, you know, I consider myself quite knowledgeable about technology. It's been a really steep learning curve for me, and so I've, you know, I've been trying to experiment with little things, and like I said, when they don't work, go back to what I originally thought. And don't be afraid if your colleagues seem to be computer whizzes and you're feeling left behind. Everybody's at different stages, and I think and so are our students, you know. So I've had training, but my students haven't had any training. You might have had a lot of training, and one of your colleagues hasn't had much training in technology. So I think it's important to be patient with each other and to learn from each other. Use it as an opportunity. And it's possible that in secondary you might actually be learning a thing or two from your students. So don't be afraid. let them help you. I know that in classes with adults, they've often helped me a lot with the technology. In a face-to-face class where we've been using interactive whiteboard and things, and they've been great. They actually help me out, and so it's they're practicing their English while they explain to me how to turn the screen on or something. So it's a learning experience for all of us. So I do encourage you to use the COVID experience as an opportunity to learn in that way as well. Okay, so the other thing that we can do is to really value relationships. And so what does that mean for English, the English language? Well, it means that we can use English to stay connected. And that's an example of a very meaningful way of using the language. And if the language is used in a meaningful way, the students will remember it. So they could be given lists of vocabulary and things to read that they're not interested in, and comprehension questions that they don't really engage with. But a simple conversation like, how are you? What have you been doing? That will stay with them because it's meaningful, and it's about what they're doing at the moment, and it's about their own personal experiences. Okay, and they tend to stick in their memories. The favorite part of my lesson every week, where I see my students in their virtual class, is seeing their friends again, and they've told me that. So they are happy to talk in English because they are able to speak to each other, and I think that's really sweet that they're using their English to stay connected. And so what that means is that at the beginning of every class, I'm going to try and give them a couple of minutes to talk to each other in English. And I think it's important for them to share their personal experiences, because that's part of forming the relationships. If you're showing a genuine interest in what they're doing and perhaps how they're feeling as well, you've got an opportunity to revise all the adjectives that you want the students to remember, for an exam later on, but it will really stick with them if they're actually describing their own feelings at the moment. So there's different ways of staying in touch. It could be that you have a virtual class where you have to give a class online, or it could be that, another way of staying in touch is just through a short video. A quick and efficient way of checking in could feel more personal than an email, for example. But if you don't have that option, just emailing. I mean, if you think about it, an email exchange between you and a student in English, that is genuine communication. And so it could be, that is, like I was saying before, if it's meaningful, it's going to stick in their memories. And I think we had some feedback from the previous webinars that a teacher had said that her students were also really excited to see their friends in a live session, and that was really motivating for her. And I think for me as well, it was, I really enjoyed seeing how much they enjoyed themselves as well, and talking to each other. And like I said, it was all in English, so everything was all our bases were covered. They had their speaking time, they got to practice their English, but they also got to stay connected and stay in touch and feel like they weren't alone in this experience of being in lockdown. Okay, so I'd just like to talk a bit about, we spoke earlier about motivating and meaningful activities and things to keep students engaged. And I think motivation is really important. And I came up with the 4 C's of motivation. It's a bit of a shame that it's not the 4 M's of motivation, but that didn't fit my what I wanted to say. These words all happen to start with C, but I think it sums it up. This is how we can keep our students motivated. So the first one for me is choice, giving students choice. If we give students choice, it develops their autonomy, and it makes them responsible for their own learning. And I think once we've done that, that's not a small thing, but if you are finding that your students are motivated, then that's a nugget of gold. When we give students choice, it's motivating, but it also shows our students that we trust them. And I think that in most cases, they repay that trust by doing something, really genuine, by really trying, by really putting in an effort. And so I think it can't be underestimated how much choice plays such an important role in motivating students. Okay. Challenges as well. So how can we challenge them, especially when we're at a distance? We had some great, in previous webinars, we had in the previous webinars we did on early years and primary, we had some great suggestions where teachers were saying that they set small daily challenges through, I think it was Google Classrooms or whichever platform you're using, or it could be email, it could be text message. Again, that's what I was saying before, use the technology to help you, not, it doesn't matter what you're using, it's the end result that we're after. So set small daily or bigger weekly challenges and projects, and that really keeps them motivated. The projects can be cross-curricular. So that they can be doing many things at once as well. So it may be coordinating with a colleague, what can we do so that we're ticking a couple of boxes all at once. And so they're not doing a daily chart of activities in the textbook. It's actually bringing it a bit off the page and really getting them to challenge them on putting all their imagination and creativity, investigation skills all into the one project. And then it will possibly, because it's designed in such a way, will cover a couple of areas of the curriculum. And also, of course, these would be in English, especially in our bilingual schools where we are encouraging cross-curricular projects in English. So of course, everything being in English, it's already cross-curricular. If you combine English with science, that's cross-curricular, okay? And again, collaboration. Students enjoy working together to solve problems. I think if you can set up ways that they can work together, one thing as a parent that I'm trying to do with my children, because their level of knowledge in certain subjects like maths is far beyond what I'm able to do. So I encourage my children to call their friends and see if they can work together on a maths problem or a science project. And they're really enjoying that. So I'm still in the background as a parent, making sure that they're doing the work, but I'm actually giving them the option of how to go about it. And I think when they can work with their friends or with their classmates, and again, it's going to be different circumstances, different contexts, different people, but if they do have friends that they enjoy working with, that can be a really enriching experience, because each child or each student brings their knowledge and expertise to the project, and they can motivate each other. And that has definitely been my experience with my own children. They are very motivated to get things done together, even if it's just checking in, seeing how you're going. And then you're doing two things at once there as well. They're collaborating, but they're also staying in touch. And that feeling of isolation is not so great if they're encouraged to work together. And then finally, the fourth C is context. And I think the context is what makes the learning meaningful as well. So for example, lockdown, viruses and confinement, that's a context. And I don't think we should avoid the elephant in the room, that if they are encouraged to talk about the situation and use it as as a sort of springboard for their further ideas, then they can own the situation, and it will be much more meaningful for them if they're doing a project based around what's going on at the moment. I'm going to give you some ideas for that in a moment, so stay with us. Okay, so this is what these are some ideas that I've sort of come up with that are based on one subject, but of course as soon as you're doing that in English, that becomes a cross-curricular project. But I think the idea is that the projects are adaptable. Okay, so we've got adaptable project ideas that can be done in English. When we talk about, I think open-ended projects, going back to that idea before, that the answer sometimes there isn't a right answer. And I think as teachers that can be difficult, because we, certainly in my case, it's difficult to let go of that control. It's like, I need to know what the project's going to look like in the end, so that I know how to evaluate it. But actually, some of our students' skills outstrip our own, especially in my case with their technology skills. I don't want to limit their possibilities. I'm an expert in English, but they can bring to the table their expertise in technology, for example. And if you're the technology teacher, the students could perhaps bring their expertise in English to the table. So it's a bit of give and take. And I think it's important for them to be open-ended, and for us as teachers to perhaps let go a bit of that control and see where they take you, and look at, I think whenever I've done open-ended projects, and I have done a lot, my students have always surprised me with what they can come up with. And I think, gosh, if I'd told them exactly all of the steps that they have to do, then their projects wouldn't have been as good, because I would have killed their creativity. That doesn't mean to say that there are times when I teach them every single step of the way, but I think now in confinement, in lockdown, is an opportunity where we can sort of throw it out there and see what they come up with, and provide the scaffolding and provide the support on the way, and work as collaborators with them rather than as dictators. So pitch the idea. This is an example of a project that you could set for your students, and I'm basing this on how mad my students are for technology. So get them to pitch the idea for a new computer game to a software company. So you're covering technology there and English. Okay. For music, you could get them to create music, songs, raps, or put together playlists like DJs do. So that could be music and English. And then, of course, this could be done in any subject. Make and narrate a stop motion video or an explanation video. So anything that you want the students to learn, get them to make a video about it, explaining the steps, explaining the whys, explaining the investigation, whatever, whatever you want them to do. And it's that explanation that actually helps them make sense of it too. So if they might passively read something or passively watch something, but it's not actually until they have to explain it to somebody else where that's activating and really making them make sense of what they've just learnt. And then it's very easy to evaluate, because you have the explanation video and you can look at their subject knowledge and also their knowledge of English at the same time. Okay, so there's some, if you want to take photos of the screen, I think we'll be sharing the PowerPoint or the PDF somewhere. But if you want to take photographs of the screen, you're welcome to do that. And I'm sure that you've got lots of ideas as well that you're already doing with your students that you'll be able to contribute to the discussion in a moment. So here's some more adaptable project ideas. Create a health awareness poster or infographic, and that is for art and design. So that could be about the current situation, health awareness and how to prevent disease and how to prevent, what happens, how the disease or how the virus is passed from person to person, or an information poster on how to keep healthy and safe, or something with more of a mathematical, about like with graphs and things to explain how things started and where they are now. So that could be art and design. It could be art, design and maths. It could be art, design and science, and English, of course. So that's a really good one for lots of different subjects. And investigate or discuss the potential mental health issues around isolation. So that could be related to health sciences, for example. And I think that's where you're giving them the chance to, they could actually go and investigate in Spanish and then explain it in English. That's also quite a challenge too. Sometimes it's easier just to go straight to an English website because you don't have to translate. But if it's important to make it accessible to all students, so they might actually prefer to read it in Spanish and then explain it in English, and some might prefer to read it in English and explain it in English. So that would depend on the student's level of English as to how much they can actually research in English, and it might be useful to give them some pointers in some, young learner friendly websites where they can find this information. So I think as well, if you send students to websites in English that have photos and visuals, that can sometimes help with comprehension. And also if you're setting a project, what I was talking about before, you can scaffold it, so you don't have to leave it, okay, go and find this out. No, you could give them steps to do. Being open-ended doesn't mean they don't get any help. Being open-ended means that the end result might surprise you. But it's important as well to give clear instructions on what you actually want them to do and how you want them to present it. So the information might be different, but you might have an idea of how the best way to do that, for example, making a video or making a poster. Or you could give them a choice between making a video or a poster, but giving them some relatively clear instructions would help. And again, going back to encouraging the autonomous learning rather than getting the right answer. And if students think that they have to be perfect, they might disengage. And if they think, oh, that's too hard, I can't do it, they won't do it. So again, you could perhaps break it down into mini challenges that lead to a final bigger challenge or something. And I think as well, the danger of setting difficult and uninteresting projects or work is that the more difficult it is, the more likely the parents are going to do it for them. And I think it's important that students see their parents, like I mentioned before, as a resource. So there's nothing wrong if your father is a microbiologist or your mother is a surgeon, of sitting down and talking to them about how viruses are spread and what's the danger of working in a hospital and all of that. That's fine. They can use their parents if they need to, but they're being used as a resource rather than sitting down and doing the work for them. And I was mentioning before that I, as a parent, I kind of help them with things like their time management rather than sitting down and doing the work with them. And I think if it's requiring parents to sit next to their students to help them with the work, then it's an indication that it's possibly a bit too difficult for them. Okay. And I think as well, what I was mentioning before is to let go of control and allow the children to engage with their passions, which may not be the same as yours and may not coincide with your expertise. Okay, so it's letting go and letting them engage with their passions and make some choices that are relevant to them. Just another idea for a project is to make a photo diary or write a diary from the view of a health worker or a lorry driver, for example. So that would be history and English. If that's, that will one day become a historical document if they're looking at it from their own perspective or from the perspective of somebody involved at the front line of you know, keeping us all healthy and safe. And you know, that could require some investigation on their part as well. So if you wanted to make it a diary about themselves, that's one type of project that they could do. But to add a bit more challenge and to look at it from different perspectives, that would require some investigation. So that's an example of an open-ended approach where you could have different options within that one project. So you know, hopefully I'm not telling you anything that's completely new, but it might give you the confidence to think that you're on the right track. So just bringing us to the next slide, looking at adaptable projects that can be done in English. Okay, it's important to remember that, you know, our focus is on English here. So make a video setting up and carrying out an experiment, cooking or doing some cooking, science and hospitality, that could be one. Respond to an article about how evening screen time can sabotage sleep. Okay, so there's a link there if that sounds like an interesting thing you could do with your students. And that would be science, PE and English. And we have basically the last one is to turn the curriculum into challenges and projects. So that could be any subject. So I think from my point of view, sometimes it really depends on how it's presented. It could be the most boring thing that nobody wants to learn, but it's the way you present it to them that makes it interesting. So, you know, I think as subject teachers, I would go back to, done this with science teachers before who've told me, oh, my subject's really boring and nobody wants to know about this. And I'm like, I do, tell me more about it. And pulling that out of the teachers and making them present it in a really fascinating way. And I said, you've just made me passionate about your subject just by giving me like a little window into your world. And I think if you go back to basics and think about what made you passionate about your subject and think about how you can transmit some of that passion to your students and then turn that into a little challenge for them, so that they can go away and do that. So, you know, like I mentioned before, that could be daily challenges, weekly challenges. It could be a challenge per topic that you're doing. I mean, that's all up to you. But I think it's just important to turn things on their head a bit and make them, okay, how can I make this into, you know, the whole idea of gamifying our curriculum as well. There's a reason why that's so popular, because students enjoy that idea of challenge. So I think it's important to do things at home with the resources that we have available. We need to think about adaptable and open-ended ideas. And for example, something really simple could be find out how the platform works, you know, find out how much rubbish your family generates and how many bags of rubbish are there. Making and narrating a stop motion video with toys, things like that. There's lots of great ways to turn everything into a challenge and make it relevant to your subject. Okay, so all right. So here's some ideas for the virtual classroom to just connect and say hello. Hi everyone, were you bored this week? Why or why not? Okay. Set a daily or weekly challenge or project. Answer any questions. So this is what you can do if you've been asked to check in with your students or give them a class. And then encourage students by praising effort. So something that you could do in your virtual class as well, which is really motivating, is actually talk about the work that the students have done. And that might be motivating to the others. If you are, you know, talking about the effort that certain students have put in and look at this and that, and that's also very motivating for the students who have been able to do the work. I think it's really important not to shame anybody if they haven't been able to do the work, because as we mentioned before, that everybody's situation and circumstances are different, and it could be that the students simply do not have the resources or the support at home to do what you're asking them to do. And, you know, in your face-to-face classes, they're there with you and you can scaffold and support them, but they're just not able to rely on that support, and that is not their fault. So I think it's really important not to shame students for not having done the work, but we can encourage them. We can keep encouraging them, and I would encourage you not to give up. Don't give up on them. Find out how you can help them to get the work done as well, if you are checking in, or if you're emailing them or texting them or whatever. I think that might be sort of ways to sort of find how you can help them to get started or to do the work. Okay, so there's some ideas for the virtual classroom in the sense of staying connected, okay, because I think we need to sort of ask ourselves why we're doing classes online, and for me it comes back to that connection, and it comes back to that staying in touch and showing the students that they're being supported in what they're doing and what you're asking them to do between classes. Okay, and then just a question for everybody. Can you think of any challenges? So based on what I showed you before, can you think of any challenges that you could set? So you might want to formulate a question in the question and answer box. Can you make, propose, calculate, or investigate, and finish the sentence for us and see what you might have been doing things that are, that your students have really engaged with. So if you can share something motivating and engaging, a project idea that you've been doing with your students that you think your colleagues could, that your colleagues, that the people on the webinar could benefit from, that would be great. We'd love to hear your ideas. And you can share your ideas, not in the chat, is it, Mark? It's in the question and answer, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I've just unticked a lot of the restrictions on that question and answer, so you can see everybody else's questions. You can comment on other people's suggestions. And so if there's things you want to share, we do have a couple of questions actually, Tracy.
Yep.
I think this is a good moment while people are thinking about this to add, to ask you some questions. Yep. Yeah. Shall I read that? I don't know if you've got access, so shall I read them? Okay, one of the first questions came early on from Luis when we were talking about objectives, and he was saying, obviously there's a difference between objectives when students are 13 and when they're 17. I don't know if you want to, what you want to say about that or something.
No, I think you know your students best, and you know what they're capable of, and I think that my objectives are always very close to what my students are already capable of doing. So it's that ZPD, the zone of proximal development. And I think when we set challenges, when we set objectives for our students, we have to bear in mind where they are and where we want them to get to. And I think that's going to be different for everybody, not even just by age, but by, you'll have a class of lots of different students. They're all going to be in different places. It's very unusual to have a homogenous class, no matter what age they are. So I think the objectives, it's true, they're going to have to be different for different age groups, but also for different students in your class. So that's a really good question. I don't know if I've helped much by saying that, but I don't know, Mark, if you've got something to add.
Well, one of the things I was thinking of with that was a little bit of some of the things that you were talking about earlier, which was the idea of, there's an opportunity in this learning environment, despite all of the difficulties, to allow for more learner autonomy.
Yes.
Student autonomy, and I think that's especially true as they get older. And I think, there's you mentioned this, I think, and it's something that all teachers feel, there's a potentially a fixation on perfect rather than learning.
Yeah.
And I think this is an opportunity for us to maybe work more on the learning than the perfect.
Yes.
You set challenging tasks. We talked about difficult, but it's, too difficult is counterproductive, but challenging is obviously good.
Yes. Yeah.
Which allow learners to stretch themselves and to see what they're good at and to go in directions that you might not have thought of.
Absolutely.
That's very important. Yeah. Very relevant to the things you've been talking about, Tracy, as well.
Definitely. And I will, in the next couple of slides before we finish today, I am actually going to show how to set objectives and how to check if they've been done for a particular project. So you can see how easy it is to kind of adapt to to the students that you have, you know. So I think, yeah, hopefully that will answer Luis's question as well. But I think I agree. I think we need to use this time as an opportunity rather than see it, you know, opportunity to do something that perhaps we might not be able to do normally as well. Yeah.
And then we have a question from Carlos, which was about whether we, you know, with everything that's going on, do we really want to tackle the sort of health of the COVID thing again in the classroom when it's so much a part of everything else? And again, well, you know, what do you think, Tracey?
Well, I find, to me, it's difficult to ignore. Like, I think it depends again on where you're at and whether you think it might be overkill. I'm certainly not suggesting that all of the projects should be about COVID, but it's just to show you an idea of how, using the COVID context, we can come up with you know, different projects. But certainly they're kind of examples of how to, not what to, if you know what I mean. And I think, you know, I think that just depends again on your own. I don't think we should ignore it either, because I'm finding it difficult. I'm finding it very difficult to watch my normal television programs simply because I can't concentrate on anything else. And so I'm drawn to the whole topic. So I don't know whether maybe our students are feeling that it's like, if we just ignore it as well, that might not be the answer either. So I think it's a bit of a balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I would agree. And I think, you know, that Carlos's point is equally relevant. If you know, it's almost like a personal choice. I think the danger is pretending it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Not happening, which of course is, you know, because you're worried about how the students are relating to it. But I think if you decide that enough's enough, then that's a choice that you make as well.
Yeah.
We've got, I'm just looking here, we've got a few questions about, you know, platforms to share that allows you to share videos, or can we share tools that students can, that was from Almudena as a question. Susanna said, can we share tools that students can use to check whether their English writing is correct? Any resources? So there's a few things about sharing resources. I'm not sure that we have, I mean, we had, I think there's a slide at the end where we have some resources.
Yeah, we have some, yeah.
But if you've got anything to share with people, then please share them here. And otherwise we'll collate, as we've done in the past, and put them on our web pages where we put the presentation as well.
Yeah.
Also, Almudena's saying something about, hang on, I'm trying to read this from a distance of my eyesight. I'm thinking that my favourite book, something for International Book Day. That's an idea as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And we also had Elva said that following the last webinar, she filmed her desk and appeared on screen explaining what she liked about the place where she works, which the students loved. And they also did the same for her and each other. So there was a simple idea there.
It's a really simple idea, but as I was saying before, those students are really going to remember that. That's going to, you know, you won't need to do a test on them 2 weeks later to see if they've remembered it, because they will have. And so I think that's what's nice about those types of projects, because they're meaningful and because they're engaging and simple. They don't have to be complicated, but the students will remember that. And I think it's much more, we were saying in previous webinars, weren't we? Less, sometimes less is more, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And it's
We've only got 5 minutes, Tracey, so I don't know if you want to move on to your...
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll just wrap up with my last slide in case anyone's curious about how I would evaluate. This is what I've got here, is evaluating open-ended projects. So this is just to give you an idea. It's not rocket science. One thing that you mentioned, Mark, before about the learning objectives, what I do with my students is, if possible, I set the criteria with them so that it is transparent. And I think I also keep in mind my students' strengths and weaknesses. So for some students, the evaluation criteria might be slightly different because I want them to work on something different. I guess that's up to you and what you're expected to do. But where possible, I always try to make the criteria transparent, and where possible to also, you know, ask them, what do you think we need to work on here? What do you think would make a good project? And so, for example, don't forget to evaluate effort, creativity, ability to learn from mistakes, attention to audience and purpose, and achieving the set task, okay? So it could be, you know, that you want students to make a video and you can't hear them very well. So they need to next time work on their voice projections. It's very simple things like that. Or it could be you want them to work on their pronunciation or pausing for effect, or, you know, it depends on what you're setting them to do. But I think all of those things, effort, creativity, ability to learn from mistakes, attention to audience and purpose, and achieving the set task are crucial. Okay, so for example, we have an example here of if, for example, the task was to make a YouTube video explaining a scientific process, you can ask questions to help you evaluate. So, was the explanation clear and easy to follow? Did the student use the appropriate technical vocabulary? Did they take your feedback into account for the final draft of the script? And would this video help other students understand the concept? So that's peer evaluation. So you could actually divide up a unit of work that you have to do for science, for example, and each student or group of students have to make a little video or poster or something explaining that concept to their peers. And one of the ways of evaluating that would be, well, did their peers understand the explanation? And if they didn't, look at ways to, what would they need to improve next time if they were doing something similar. So it could be including steps, breaking it down into smaller steps so that, you know, people can follow, or making sure that it follows a logical format or something like that. So that's just some simple, easy ways to keep in mind if they've achieved your objectives. And again, I would go through these with my students. So this is just a quote from our first webinar. I really liked it. Julie shared this with us in the chat, and she said, we're in a hyperactive society, and especially now with everything that's coming in online and all these activities, and human contact is what's important, not 5,000 activities to fill the confinement time. So I think, Mark, what we were saying before, less is more, is very pertinent at the moment, I think. So here we've got some further links and resources, and I think that's it from me, Mark, unless there's more questions that are coming in that you think we should answer.
There are more than questions, there are ideas. I wonder if people
yeah.
That sometimes because we've answered an idea or we've made a comment, it's disappeared into the answered section. So you can see, but I've got open questions and answered questions. So you might find that some things are actually in the answered section. The minute we comment on them, they disappear. I hadn't realized. So apologies if people don't see their questions suddenly. We've got I'm just looking at what something else that people might have shared. We've got Monse said that she's shared an idea that's worked with her students. It's just been to have them record a short video showing 5 things they're doing in confinement, five things maybe that are different, and they're enjoying that.
Great.
Luis has asked a specific question about some of his workmates who are working with bilingual students have less time with their learners, so they're able to focus less on English specific content, working with them much. But I was wondering whether actually the sort of cross-curricular projects that you're suggesting are a way of dealing with that, you know, so that it's just part of the subject learning. That's not a...
Yeah, to make it so that it could be that they have to explain a process, a scientific process, make a short video or a poster or a blog entry or something about it. So that's sort of a way of making it cross-curricular just by making them do it in English.
Yeah. I mean, I think, thanks very much for everybody who's asked a question or shared an idea. I'm just very conscious of the time now. We've chatted for an hour already. Maureen, do you want to show us the last slide? Oh, have you got it up there, of the resources? Something you want to say about where this will be, if you're with us, Maureen?
Hi everyone, we'll be putting the recordings for all of our webinars on our British Council YouTube channel. So we have a repository now, we're building up a repository of resources which you can refer back to. And we are updating as well on our special COVID-19 resources page, where you can link through to the PowerPoints. And don't forget that our global Teaching English page as well, they're also putting on a lot of webinars and sharing resources that are perhaps more adapted to the learning environment which we're all finding ourselves in just now. So these are all British Council sources where you can access the resources that we're constantly producing these days.
Thanks, Maura.
And just to point out, we've got a lovely event from our arts team tomorrow.
Oh, yes.
We've got a Facebook Live event where you can find out who the top influences are for Rosa Montero, for Javier Sierra, Nuria Barrios, and Jessie Burton. So join us tomorrow if you can, and get your students to join us as well. Yeah. It'd be great for them.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, one thing that's clear is not only our resources, I mean, the British Council, but there's an amazing amount of activity going on that would be really of interest, I think, to teachers with classes, as well as us as adults and our students as, you know, just as young people. But there's an awful lot of stuff which is quite good, I think, for potential teaching material as well, teaching experiences. Yeah. So that's great. So thanks very much for joining. Thank you very much again, Tracey, as always, for the session. Thanks everybody for your contributions, for being with us. Stay safe, stay well, and I hope we see you again soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.